live.
So in 1962 in Hershey, Pennsylvania, Wilt Chamberlain famously scores 100 points. Now, at the time, there wasn't any TV cameras. There was a dearth of TV cameras, but reporters came afterwards because they knew Wilt was on pace for 100 points. And afterwards, a reporter grabbed one of his teammates and asked him about the game. And without hesitation, the teammate answered, "Tonight will be remembered for all history as the night that Wilt and I combined to score 102 points."
I'm about to get mine and it's about time. Call us Grindhouse, everybody in a house grind. I'm just doing me, I ain't trying to outshine. Trying to kill my vibe is how you get outline.
Welcome to the Hoopstorians. Today in NBA history. So September 5th, 1982, the Houston Rockets trade Moses Malone to the Philadelphia 76ers for Caldwell Jones and a future first-round pick. Now, remember, Malone's actually signed a tender offer with Philadelphia. I consider this really a free agency move because Malone signed a tender with the Sixers. The Rockets said they were going to match, and then they essentially did what was a signing trade. Obviously, Moses Malone was the reigning MVP in '82. It was 31-15, I think, that year in Houston, and then goes on to be the anchor for one of the greatest teams of all time, the 1983 Sixers. And they go 65-17, and they go this famous faux run where he predicts a sweep the whole way, but they do lose one game, I believe, to Milwaukee in that run. So they only lose one game throughout the playoffs and thrash the Lakers in the finals, the defending champion Lakers in the finals. So I guess the question is, where do you think Moses Malone ranks all time? Is he overrated? Is he underrated? And what are some of the things that stand out to you about Moses Malone's game? We'll start with Jules.
I do think that he's somewhat underrated when it comes to all-time great centers. When I evaluate him, some critiques I do have is that I think he had a capable motor on the defensive end, but he wasn't necessarily using it a ton unless it was on the rebounding side of things, which is, great to him. But there's a lot of these different centers that I'm seeing, like, basically work him in the post where I'm kind of, questioning the motor consistently, because he has a great, like I said, all-time great rebounder, all-time great offensive rebounder, so he can contribute to winning in different ways. But in the terms of underrated guys, I don't know any other multiple-time MVPs and basically almost for a decade regarded or being upwards with Kareem as being the best at the position and outdueling him in definitive series and in games rather routinely. So I think he's a very underrated player, and he deserves a little bit more respect. But I do think what hurts him is the longevity that he has. Ends up later in his career, just not really equating to much.
Tony, what do you think of Moses Malone?
I think I got him locked. I have him 14th all time on my list. I think he's a locked top 15 player. I think he can go a little higher than that. I see people now that, have all-time lists that have guys like Jokic over him. I don't understand what Jokic has over him. They each got one title, 3 MVPs, except Moses Malone has, 30,000 points, and 18,000 rebounds if you, count his ABA career. And if you don't want to count his ABA career too, then it's 27,000, 16,000, rebounds with more all-stars, more all-defensive teams, more all-NBA teams. So, I don't understand when people rank like Jokic over him. I don't understand why people rank Jerry West over him. Jerry West don't have an MVP. Jerry West don't have a title as the best player on the team. So yeah, I don't understand. Same thing goes for Dr. J. I don't think Dr. J has any argument over him. I don't think Oscar has any argument over him, and I see those guys regularly ranked over him. But yeah, I think he's a top 15. I think he's 12 to top 15 guy, depending on your rankings.
All right, so we're continuing a conversation that we had last week. We were going through some of the way defenses played over time from the 50s basically, and we got to the 2000s before the program had ended, and now we're at the 2000s. We want to talk about some of the underrated defenders, how teams were scheming defenses back then, I want to start by saying, and I think this isn't a hot take, this isn't a novel take. But back the 2000s is really, the dead ball. Everybody knows the dead ball era where points are harder to come by. A lot of the games are played a lot more in the paint, and I think a big reason of that is Shaquille O'Neal. The Shaq comes in 2000 and is the most physically dominant force arguably the league has ever seen. Averages 30 points per game in the regular season, 30 points per game in the playoffs, 38 and 17 in the finals, and so teams are loading their rosters with bigs and often frankly unqualified bigs because they need the bodies to throw at Shaq in order to compete meaningfully for a title. So, like, having said all of that, Jules, like to talk about the 2000s, who are some of the more like underrated or underappreciated defenders that you think are in the 2000s, both in the perimeter or in the interior?
So it's ironic because we were talking about shortly before we ended our last program that from 95 on, I've noticed the kind of switch into the more perimeter centric offensive attacks. So there's people who are shooting a little bit more 3-pointers, at least the spacing is starting to come, and it's unironically like starting to emerge when Shaq is dominating the league, and now it seems like that spacing kind of shrinks back down to size a little bit because we're seeing most notably somebody like a Kevin Garnett, right? Catch the ball at the 3-point and take a big step in and take this long two. So it's rather ironic. But to answer the question for like underrated guys, I think during the early 2000s, specifically any of those guys on the Pistons, Rip, I think is pretty good off ball. I think Tayshaun Prince is a very underrated guy. We all know who Ben Wallace was, so Ben Wallace doesn't need any really like deserving of any kind of like notoriety. But there's some like niche guys here and there that I like. Obviously, there's Bruce Bowen who's giving 6 to 7 points a game, and he doesn't necessarily equate to a whole bunch of steals and blocks. But you're seeing by the defensive motor and the attention that he's putting onto guys is that he's clearly affecting their jump shooting. And everybody's their field goal percentage starts to go down while a hyper aggressive guy is the point of attack, a defender. There's some other guys, maybe middle of the 2000s. Sometimes, like I'm torn about Shawn Marion. I know he doesn't get any defensive teams, which is really funny. But I think he's an okay guy. But I think it starts to become really interior defense is starting to be valued because now we're seeing really, really good defenses. I mentioned the Pistons. I mentioned the Spurs with Tim Duncan. We see Kevin Garnett be a versatile monster and play this mismatch zone in 03 against the Mavericks and basically nullifying Steve Nash for 2 games. So it's a whole bunch of like where we're getting to see a lot of defensive versatility of guys who have the skill set who can guard 1 through 5, quote unquote, and start to really affect the game.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about like interior defenders, I think like the early 2000s, you got guys like Clifford Robinson too, who's there with the early iteration of the Pistons that like are really becoming a playoff caliber and then like eventually a contending team. Doug Christie's another one. He's, a little bit more celebrated. I know he makes a few all defensive teams, but as a perimeter defender with the 02 Kings, I think he doesn't get talked about enough. Another one who was really hitting his peak as a defender before he got hurt and he wasn't really the same was Tyronn Lue. He was all defensive first team in Washington. He goes to the Cleveland, but I think he gets hurt and he's not really the same. But before then, he's considered one of the better perimeter defenders in the NBA. I also think, and he doesn't get enough credit for it, and maybe it's not quite 2000s, maybe it's more 2010s, but Pau Gasol. Pau Gasol is giving you good interior defense in 09. He's giving you like reliably 2 blocks per game, sometimes 3 blocks per game in a playoff series. He's giving you what?
Guys, I want to add someone. I don't think we give enough credit to Theo Ratliff. Yeah. And then another one that nobody ever gets talked about. He was really good defensively for about 10 years. and then he started aging out, after the first couple of years in 2000. But 03, I remember his defense was still good for the entire season, and even if it was Bo Outlaw. Bo Outlaw made no defensive teams. He made 3 top 10 finishes, including a top 5 defensive player of the year finish, and he never once got an all the. But at his peak, he's like a 2-and-2 guy. Guy that gets you average like 2 blocks, 2 steals, things like that at his peak. So, and he's kind of undersized, but he was long, and he was it's really cut. He was like a 6'8" guy, but I mean he could guard perimeter and post as well. And I don't think we ever talked about Bo Outlaw.
Mm-hmm.
Another one, Kirk Heinrich, like he comes out of Kansas. He's not really as good as he's supposed to be. I think he's like a top 5 pick out of Kansas, and he plays for the Bulls. He's still pretty good, but he is an all defensive team at least once or twice. He's 6'4". He's got the length. You find a lot of like point guards that have that frame that are 6'4", and they're long and they're reasonably athletic. Gary Payton, Jason Kidd, etc. can do a lot for you with their point of attack defense, and even switchable onto the perimeter. So he's another one that I think could get more credit. But obviously the more celebrated guys. This is the era of where everything's really played in the interior post merger, right? And so we've got obviously the big ones: Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Mutombo, right, in the earlier part of the decade. Even PJ Brown, I think, is another one.
Okay.
So we have like Shane Battier too is another one too. He's obviously a big part of those Heat teams. He's another guy, probably not as good as he was supposed to be coming out of college. He's probably the best player in the country at Duke, but he still comes in and plays a strong defensive role in Memphis, and then goes on to the Rockets and then plays a key role in Miami Heat's 2 championship teams. So those are a few of the guys. I think the more valuable, interior is always the more valuable defender throughout most of NBA history, although I think we're seeing a shift now. But back then, I think it really is more important because we're seeing a lot of the games won in the paint, giving a little too much credence to low post offense, especially in like the 05 finals where it's particularly ugly and a difficult watch.
Well, that's what I was going to say, and that's why I kind of mentioned specifically about the defensive versatility, because Hoops and I, we've had this discussion, and we had a couple friends all off screen talk about this as well, is that a lot of the role players that are being implemented during this time, there's no way that you're not going to tell me that people like Shane Battier, Shawn Marion, people who are 3-and-D guys who are getting limited role minutes during this time aren't going to be significantly, quote unquote, either better or more valuable in today's game. So I would agree it's starting to shift. I would still say you still need a primary rim protector to be a decisively good defense, to be a valuable defense. But it's starting to change to where we're seeing more of the perimeter shot, or at least taking a self-creation type of look now than ever. So a lot of these 3-and-D role players would be way more valuable now, in my opinion.
It does open up a bit more, but 05 in particular, you're getting treated too if you watch that Nazir Muhammad and Antonio McDyess getting looks in the low post and trying to make offense happen, and you're getting 60 up until the fourth quarter in Game 7. I think the Pistons had scored 60-something points, and then the rest was garbage time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nasty.
Yeah, obviously we have the more celebrated play. There's a lot of really celebrated guys that we've always talked about, like Kobe, who's an elite perimeter defender at the earlier part of the decade. Gary Payton's still there. Jason Kidd, one of the few guys that can anchor a defense from the perimeter. Changing the Nets from a 20-something ranked defense to the number 1 ranked defense when he goes to New Jersey and turns that team around. Bruce Bowen is one. I think he gets a little too much credit actually back then, because he's getting more DPOY votes than Tim Duncan. That's just,
how come nobody brings up Lindsey Hunter? You think
Lindsey Hunter
plays
for the Pistons and the Lakers. Plays for the Lakers later.
02.
Yeah, 02. He plays for the Lakers in 02. Then he goes and plays for Detroit. He's another player I think that doesn't get talked about enough. Even Derek Fisher. I think Derek Fisher is a pretty strong perimeter defender, because Fisher, we always credit, I think, Kobe for getting those assignments in like 01, right? But really, it's Fisher that's staying on Iverson that most of that series, right? Fisher and Ty Lue. So, he's another one as well. I think that probably should get more credit.
Yeah, I agree. And again, the versatility thing, I just want to knock that home. Like, there's a whole bunch of guys. Like I think Tayshaun and I think Shane Battier are two specific guys that I've watched recently that are being able to switch 1 through really 4.
James Posey's another one on the 08 Celtics, especially. He's a 6 Man of the Year candidate, but he's a very strong defender in the perimeter as well.
His best defense was with the Nuggets, and nobody talks about that. And he was awesome for it. Just the Nuggets sucked, so it didn't really do nothing. The bottom line is wins loss, but he was awesome defender with the Nuggets.
And even on that, we're got to talk about Kendrick Perkins. I know it's hard to look at Kendrick Perkins as a serviceable NBA player now that he's a decidedly unserviceable analyst in the NBA, but his strength down low and his ability to guard fives in the post effectively, like Dwight Howard, for example, like Pau Gasol, like Andrew Bynum, it was a key part of the Celtics contention. And when they lost him in the later part in the 2010s, you really saw that interior open up in the playoffs, especially like 2011 against Miami.
Absolutely. I think going forward though, later in the 2000s and the 2010s, that now we're seeing the implications of small ball lineups and the implication of almost a switch everything kind of mode, to where we're tasking people to have to guard 1 through 5. Guards are having to become basically 6'5", 6'6" to be even, unless you're an anomaly like, Steph or something like that. That's just, offensive firepower god. But like for defensive versatility purposes, you have to be a certain height and have some type of, athletic prowess to even be on the court because of how these lineups are being made. So what's some notes of interest do you think from like the 09 season to like really 2015, 2016 that you're starting to notice during this time? Because I think this is where we start to see the switch everything kind of mode.
Thabo Sefolosha comes to mind immediately. He's a part of that young core with the Thunder, and he's an all-defensive team member, and he's seen as, it's him and Serge Ibaka, but Thabo Sefolosha is seen as one of the premier perimeter defenders in the league, and he's 6'6". He's switchable, and he's a key part of their contention. I think Luol Deng is up there too. As someone who's
Luol Deng.
Avery Bradley Avery Bradley's another gun we talk about that is a stocky point guard, point of attack, but can play guys like Dwayne Wade. Obviously we all know about Tony Allen in that era. I already talked about Shane Battier and how important he is for his switchability. I think Gerald Wallace is another one that goes relatively uncelebrated. I know he's got
Gerald Wallace.
Gerald Wallace, and like in 2010 he's an all-star for the Bobcats, right? But he's he's 6'7" who plays above his station, but is a very strong defender at that time. And even on the Bobcats in like the mid-ish 2010s is and I know, again, a guy who doesn't live up to his draft stock, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, is actually one of the better perimeter defenders of that time.
Yeah, I agree. Whack ass shot, but actually a pretty good at keeping his man in front of him and denying a strong ball action or trying to drive. Like there's a lot of people I'm seeing have difficulty on Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, like specifically himself.
And we actually see Andre Iguodala make his first and only All-Star team when he has one of his lower points per game average as a starter in Philadelphia. Because when we see him in the late 2000s, he's like a 17 point per game guy. He looks like he's going to be something. He doesn't end up being that thing, but he makes his first All-Star team averaging 12 points per game because he's seen as one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA with his length. And obviously we know about his heroics in the 2015 finals and all of that. So, and he actually makes the 2012 to the 2012 Olympic team that year, seen as one of the better Olympic teams that the USA's ever fielded. And I think his defense is an important part of that. And so we're starting to see the sort of the early days with him and Battier and Dang of like the 3-and-D type of the prototype that is probably the most valuable position in basketball now for a role player to fill.
Yeah, and I was actually having this kind of discussion from like 08 to like 11, outside of what LeBron, Kevin Durant, Melo, Paul Pierce, and maybe I'm forgetting about one guy, but I really think 5 through 10 is the most wonky set of small forwards because most of them are the 3-and-D type prototype guys, to where there's people who are averaging 17 points, but they're giving you elite perimeter defense. Well, Dang, Andre Iguodala, Sean Marion for a short period of time, Shane Battier, Rudy Gay, if you want to talk about that. Like, he's not a really good defender, but he's a scorer guy. But like, that is where I think this is where I'm starting to see the, like, all right, these considered top 10 small forwards, or at least at the position, they could be easily, maybe even top 5 guys, because of how the position is really utilized today, because of just how almost like dead the position really is, because we're seeing all these small forwards now are moving to power forwards. And there's only really like 2 or 3 real small forwards now in the NBA that aren't, I guess, I don't want to say role players, because I feel like that's disrespectful, but it's playing the role of a 3-and-D type wing.
Yeah, like look at Dorian Finney-Smith he's another one. He's a small forward in most eras, but he plays the 4 oftentimes. I think he's widely heralded as one of the better 3-and-D guys in the NBA. I mean, I think Dylan Brooks makes like $80 million on his defense, because it's certainly not his fucking offense. Right. When you got an $80 million contract from the Rockets, makes an all defensive team in Memphis as well the year before. Obviously the most like evolved version of that, I would say, is Klay Thompson. He's like the probably the final boss of 3-and-D guys, right? Probably the best 3-and-D guy we've ever seen, because he's a very good perimeter defender while being, a top 5-ish shooter of all time. And that's, I think, in 2016 or 2015 when we really see that start to, okay, well, look at this team, look at the way people are playing now, look at the Spurs. Even Kawhi Leonard, I would call a 3-and-D guy, almost like a 3-and-D guy earlier in his Spurs days as well.
Yeah, a couple of years. Yeah, I'm with that.
Yeah, I would say in the early Spurs years from like 2014 on. So yeah, I mean, now it's like we're seeing defenses built more. I mean, you still have, like with the Thunder, you still have great rim protection, right? But you got Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein. But really, I think the engine behind that defense is the amount of switchable great perimeter defenders that they rotate in and out, and guys like Jay Will, who's really harkening back to Scottie Pippen. With his ability to not only be an elite perimeter defender, but also be a very good rim protector for his size. And with the game, I don't want to say shrinking, but becoming leaner, with the players becoming leaner. I think that's what's becoming more important now, is having guys that can play really the 4 through the 2, and competently guard those positions. Yeah,
I would agree, and I think I start to notice that you say J-Dub, shout out to him. I think Kawhi Leonard's getting the Scottie Pippen comparison with Hondo all the time, or at least for like the defensive wings of how great they are. But to specifically talk about today, I think you're right. I think you beautifully said about the Thunder, and I've had discussions that the Celtics of last year should be in consideration as one of the greatest like defensive teams of all time, and nobody talks about it, and I find that very weird. But I think it's now we're seeing we have to see these switchable forwards that give at least somewhat of a good rim protection as a secondary value, defensive playmaking and what they can do. But be able to be the POA guy, be able to switch on off ball screens, literally do everything on the court so they can get minutes, because maybe like almost like a Men Thompson in today's day and age, where everybody I think right now is viewing him as the poster boy of, if he takes that leap of getting a jump shot and all this kind of stuff, that he'll be, all NBA caliber guy. So I'm seeing the defensive playmaking of what is being tasked today. And I agree that rim protection will solely and always probably be the most valuable thing, but having to guard the 2 through 4 and how just versatile offenses can be, you have to have personnel to match up against these guys regardless of what they're doing.
Well, I can't believe we went this long without mentioning him, but Kentavious Caldwell Pope.
KCP,
he is a key part of this is funny. So there are only 3 guys in this decade that have won 2 championships, that have won more than 1 championship in this decade. It's Kentavious Caldwell Pope with the Lakers and Nuggets. It's Drew Holiday with the Bucks and Celtics, and it's Alex Caruso with the Lakers and the Thunder. And I think that tells you about, one, I think just in the importance of the emphasis on having role players versus the quote unquote super team era, or like the multi-star team era, and 2, how important having those elite guys on the perimeter and who can also knock down a 3 here and there is to winning basketball, because the Bucks lose Drew Holiday and they're absolutely fucking rancid on defense the following year, despite the fact that they just got one of the best offensive point guards of all time, right? And you look at how Alex Caruso was able to really elevate that defense, and how he's an all-defensive player in Chicago, and how when he got put in the starting lineup with the Lakers in 2020, how that made a huge difference in how they were able to play. And KCP is the same way. KCP, he comes to the Nuggets in 23 and really changed, and he leaves the Nuggets in 24 and 25. Nuggets, again, were pretty rancid on defense without him. I wouldn't say rancid, but they weren't nearly as good. They were definitely missing that type of 3-and-D defense that he was able to provide.
Yeah. And I agree. I think there's certain cogs in certain systems, regardless of where you go, that it's going to be valuable no matter what. And the impact signings in the off season aren't going to be these superstar type players. Yes, we all care about name value of what they're going to, but it's going to be like the Isaiah Hartenstein of going to the Thunder that's going to have more value. It's going to be the KCPs that are going to Orlando that are going to be like, that's a big reason why I think a lot of people have Orlando talking this year specifically, but just all time when we talk about how the evolution of defense is starting, getting back to the point of last episode, that we're seeing how each era is being elevated, the people who are in there, what they're being tasked to do, and eventually coming to where we're at now, to where I think it's definitely an all-time talented league, but it's definitely different from day one. But to segue, I know, Hoops, you wanted to talk about something that's been irritating you, and I think it irritates me as well, the lack of film and not ranking players. So please, I would love this rant.
Here's my thing, and because I get it, everybody's busy, especially in this economy, right? You got to work, so you can't watch everything, right? And I understand that you can't watch everything. Maybe you don't want to watch everything, and I get that too, right? Maybe you can watch a half of a game. Maybe you can watch a fucking game, right? And just of these players, because a lot of people just say, well, I can't rank Bill Russell, or I can't rank Jerry West, or I can't rank fucking Bob Cousy because there isn't enough film available. I personally think there is. I think there's enough that you can go just on YouTube, watch a full game, even watch half a game. And I understand there isn't as much as there is in the 90s, or of course the 2010s, or of course today, that you can go back and rewatch and really get a full, get the full picture with your eyes. But it's kind of like anything else when we're talking about the past and putting things in historical context. What you can do is you can watch those games. You can listen to in some of those 60 games, so you can listen to the commentators. Like, for example, I forget which game it was. I think it was 62-63 finals, one of the Celtics-Lakers finals. And they're saying, like, you can hear the commentator saying, like, oh, they're trying to avoid Russell. They're trying to avoid the paint, right? And just sort of get that context with the numbers, with doing some research and, realizing you would have averaged eight blocks per game if they had counted it, right? With maybe reading some old newspaper articles on what people who were covering the league were saying about these players back then. Because as much as we want to dunk on the media isn't always wrong about everything, and especially back then when it's not as take heavy as it is today. And so I think when people say that I can't rank these guys because there isn't enough film, I guarantee those same people aren't watching full seasons of Michael Jordan or full seasons of LeBron James or full seasons of those guys. Maybe they're watching full series in real time, but you're not going back and doing the study that you say that you're doing on these other players. Maybe some people are. I know there's a lot of really dedicated people that do it. I try to do as much as I can, but again, I understand everybody's got busy lives. But I think the dearth, like the quote unquote dearth of film, is an excuse for people to just sort of, I only want to rank players that I've watched, or I like to watch, or I like to watch highlight reels on, because I think you can watch enough and draw those inferences. Do you have to box score watch a little bit? Yeah, but you're doing that anyway. And I think people are really getting lazy about how they want to contextualize the era and just square it off so they can put like fucking Kevin Durant in their top 10.
Well, wait, I had a question to ask you on that. One, what do you say to the people when you're trying to compare these players and you're like, well, Bill Russell averages like 8 blocks, and they go, well, it wasn't recorded, so we can't count it. So we have to count it as a 0. You know what I mean? Which I think is a terrible way to do it, because he's clearly not getting 0 fucking blocks.
Yeah.
And then secondly, my question for you guys too is, do you think we'll ever see the return of the post game?
Yes,
I don't.
I think so. I think so.
I don't.
I think so, and I'll explain why really quick. If you disagree, that's completely fine. I think there is, because of what we're seeing specifically now, as a 2 big men rule, because of, we ironically talked about it before, we're having to implement a whole bunch of centers to guard Shaq, and obviously they're signing people off the street. They're not signing the people off the street like they're doing with Jokic right now, but they're getting these competent centers to where they're loading up on the back end, to where a lot of these big end centers aren't 3-point shooters. They're post players. Zubac, Steven Adams, Clint Capella, all this kind of stuff, to where, like, you're not tasking these guys to go and shoot threes. You're tasking them to play defense, and you're tasking them to do what they can do best. And it's post offense. And a lot of the time, when you have to combat somebody who's that good at something, you have to match the same skill set. That's why somebody like Zubac is one of the best defenders on Jokic, because he matches tit for tat for him. So it might not necessarily be for the long haul, but I think it will come back.
It depends on how good the Nuggets get. But my problem with that is that you're talking, okay, Zubac, Steven Adams, Clint Capella. They're not like new guys. They've been in the league for a long time. Zubac is just, I think, really, really elevated his game in the last few years. But remember, he was on the Lakers in like 2018, 2019, and they gave him away for fucking nothing. And Jerry West famously laughed about it. But Zubac, Steven Adams, Clint Capella have been around for a long time, and I would say Clint Capella is even more of at his peak, more of like a rim running type of guy. Obviously, Jokic is there, and obviously guys like LeBron, even Shea, they can play offense. They run some offense out of the post. But the problem is, I think even when you're playing a guy like Jokic, the math is what the math is, and people have. I think we've got to the point with analytics where a lot of these very smart NBA players, NBA GMs and execs are saying, "Now you know what's good is just hoisting threes, as many threes as you can, getting enough." Competent enough shooters or high volume, high efficiency shooters, and winning the math game night in and night out. The Boston Celtics are the perfect example of that, obviously, in 2024. So as good as Jokic is and as dominant as he is individually, I don't think, first of all, he's won enough for them to be like, oh shit, what are we going to do about Jokic? And two, even if Jokic is there, I just think, the math is the math. The math is the math with that. And what they're gonna, I think people are discovering that the higher value shots, especially with the amount of people that can make those shots today, is just going to be worth more than trying to construct your roster over stopping one player who's only won a single title.
And then what about the people that don't count any of the blocks of like Bill Russell?
So that's my thing. You know, which game was it? 64, game 5. It's only the second half of the game. 64, game 5, the Royals and the Celtics. And the very first play of the second half, it's on YouTube. Very first play of the second half, Oscar Robertson goes straight. He goes straight to the bucket and tries to lay it up. And Bill Russell jumps so fucking high and just knocks that shit right out of the air, right? And that's Oscar Robertson, one of the best scoring guards of his era, one of the best scoring guards of all time. And
one of the best athletes.
We're one of the best athletes. And we're just supposed to watch that and say, well, that doesn't count. No, you can fucking see it. You can see that it counts. You can see him doing it. So if you can see him doing it, and you have the context, the amount of blocks he probably got per game. Even if you want to say, well, 8's too many, that's just what they have on film. Maybe they have more of his higher blocks. Okay, lower it to 7, even lower it to fucking 6, right? And it's still 6 blocks per game would be the highest block per game average in NBA history, because Mark Eaton got 5.9 in the late 80s, and he had the record. It was 5.6. Yeah, 5.6 in the late 80s, and that's the record. So he would still have, him or Wilt Chamberlain would still be the all-time leaders in at least blocks per game average. And again, you can watch those games. You can even watch highlights of Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain blocks, and you can see that they're blocking. You can see that they're blocking shots. To just say, well, it doesn't count because they weren't counting it, is absolutely ridiculous, especially when you consider the context of that era where there's no 3-point line and the paint is that, everybody's trying to score around the interior. And to say it doesn't count when you can see it, I think is just lazy.
Hey, what do you think, Jules?
No, I couldn't say it better myself. And that's why I kind of hold like Oscar and Jerry in such high regard, is that I'm seeing even like it doesn't have full totality stats of like where they're shooting on the floor or how really effective they are, but I'm doing my research to go and at least try to watch games and read articles and all this kind of stuff of where they're shooting from the floor, how they're elevating these teams on the offensive side, and all that kind of stuff, to where it's like, to nullify the Celtics, we have a all-time guard who is shooting 18 to 22-foot jump shots, who are basically nullifying Bill Russell's rim protection, because now he's out here shooting jump shots, to where now we're tasking, perimeter guys to go and guard him, and he's still shooting at a 50% clip during the 60s. So I'm being able to understand that. I can contextualize that because I at least watch a game. I'm understanding what's being said. I'm hearing that. I'm doing my research. And you've heard me say this before, is I think the NBA community is the laziest community in sports, and it's not close, because in any other sport, regardless of era, they don't do this type of thing. It's upsetting. It's very upsetting as a community to belittle the sport just how it is.
Yeah. You know how I would like to fix it? This is how I would like. Tell me what you guys think. I don't know why the NBA just can't go back and they give back, retroactive defensive players of the year, finals MVPs, defense. And then just for whatever games they have, they just do incomplete stats. You know what I mean? We have Bill Russell's block shots over 600 of his 900 games. And, he has a total of 6,000 or whatever the number is. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know why we can't do that. What's wrong with it?
I agree. I mean, even give George Mikan like 7 MVPs too, right? And I think I think we've said this before. The one thing that I think Bill Russell should have on his resume is about 7 Finals MVPs. You can say the depoys would be important, obviously, but I think people know that he's the best defender of his era, him and Wilt Chamberlain. And maybe they alternate, maybe Pettit wins one or something like that. Maybe Jerry West wins one. I don't know, but I think everybody accepts that. They accept that, but they say, oh, he wasn't the best player on his team or something like that. Oh, because he played with all these Hall of Famers. But it's like, all right, well, what about when he's averaging like 20 points, 29 rebounds, and 4 assists in a final. He's winning Finals MVP in 1962. He's winning Finals MVP in 1961. He's winning Finals MVP in 1963. Right? If he get like,
no, I'm gonna be honest with you. I think he wins 59, where he averages 9 points and 30 rebounds. I argue that one all the fucking time. He averages 30 fucking rebounds, and he probably averaged another 12 blocks.
Yeah, and I think he had was that the one he had a 19 and 30 closeout game against the Lakers? I can't remember, but either way, he's probably got 6 or 7. I think 7 Finals MVPs.
I think he's got 8.
8, even better. So if he had those, if they retroactively gave him all the Finals MVPs he deserved, and even gave Wilt the Finals MVP he probably deserved in 67, then I think it goes a long way to, I think, solidifying that these guys were the best players on their team, or they were the best player. You know, that Bill Russell especially was the best player on his team for those runs, because he was absolutely the best Finals performer in 7 to 8 finals, even if he won 6. You know, like I said, like even if he won 6, okay, he's got 6 Finals MVPs, he's made it 12 times, and he's won 11, right? And you can say that's the best player on your team. That's
the rest of the entire team. The rest of the team has 5, if you want to say 5, versus 6 just for him.
And furthermore, like the 5 would be like what, 67. I mean 57.
69 without a doubt. Well, they already have a Finals MVP.
Well, what I'm saying is the two, like the couple that he wouldn't win, right, would be like 57.
60, I think 57, 68, and 69 would be his worst cases. 69, no argument.
And that's kind of the point, is that, okay, well, at the beginning of the decade, and like those 5 are spread out from like the beginning and the end of the decade, and still like in the heart of that run, he's still winning all those Finals MVPs. And I think that would be, again, I think that'd be the most important thing for a guy like him.
Jules, what do you think? Do you think they should go back and do all that?
It would be tough, but it would help the cases of the younger generation to be able to contextualize what is happening. Because, like, and we've had this like discussion or this like example before, is that like people will read something in a textbook and believe it's gospel, right? But there's you know, there's bias in a textbook, and amongst its bias, it tries to be as objective as possible, but it usually chooses its wording to try to depict what you're imagining in your head, or what you're understanding during a situation. So if the NBA retroactively takes initiative and is upholding adding MVPs to people who have passed on and during the time period prior to or when their works really happened, then it would be able to help us, or the people who don't necessarily want to watch, contextualize more of the resume of what these people were actually doing. Not only a Bill Russell or Jerry or Wilt or an Oscar or whoever like that, but even people in the 50s, Mike and Bob Davies, Del Shea, Joe Fulks, all this kind of stuff, to where like now we're getting a complete story. Right. Exactly. So like, this is being able to understand from the younger generation to, I guess that and I'm not saying that it's right. I think they're lazy, but they just don't have the complete book, but they don't want to do the work themselves. So if the NBA is completing the book for them, then they should be able to be like, okay, this is a lot better, and the conversation can be a little bit more genuine. But I still feel like it might be just baby steps, because at this point, anything pre like 2010 to these kids is prehistoric. Like it's a fucking obnoxious.
Hey, what do you think? Where do you think? Like, we'll just use Bill Russell. Like, and Jules, since you're the youngest one on the panel, like when you first learned about Bill Russell, if you would have seen like 8-time Defensive Player of the Year, 7-time Finals MVP, 5-time MVP, 11-time champ, like what's this opinion now of Bill Russell?
He has to be at least minimum top 3. Like I already have him 4, and I really struggle between like him and Kareem a lot. So he's basically still in the conversation. And if you add those to the resume, if you care about the resume so much of what people kind of like box score watch and stuff like that, there's definitive, conversations of him in a actual GOAT conversation. So because now the accolades that a lot of people like to have to resume build is now definitively there. There's no fucking question. There's no question.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think we said this before, but like a lot of people like will call like Babe Ruth the greatest baseball player of all time. People will call Muhammad Ali the greatest boxer of all time. Babe Ruth played before Bill Russell, right? Muhammad Ali was dominant during the time of Bill Russell, but for some reason, even though in those same sports, the advancement, medicine, technology, all this other stuff make people bigger, faster, stronger. For basketball, for some reason, we have this obsession with sort of discounting that era. But I think if it were accepted at the time, if this at its inception, we were to say, holy shit, look at all these accolades this guy has, not only the 5 MVPs with the 11 titles, but he's got 7 finals MVPs, right? And let's say he's got 5, 6, 7 DPOYs, defensive players of the year. And I think, what's going to be honestly, the one thing I would say about that era, and it'd be better if they did it retroactively now, is that I don't think the media was super kind to Bill Russell back then, because even when he was winning MVPs, he was getting a second to Wilt Chamberlain, and people say, there were people on the record, reporters that had told like Tommy Hines said they didn't like voting for Bill. They didn't want to vote for Bill Russell for All-Star Game MVP because of because he was outspoken about civil rights. But still, I think if he had all that to his resume at the time, when we were sort of getting into this now, I think hyper-focused era of ranking people all time and dissecting people's legacy, I just think having that would make it just more inarguable. And then you couldn't say, well, he wasn't the best player on his, or he was just a role player. Role players don't average 20 points and 26 rebounds in a final series, right? Or 29 points.
Role players aren't 5-time MVPs.
Right. Role players aren't 5-time MVPs. But if you had all that to his name, of course, I think at the outset, I think it would have probably helped quite a bit if that had just been the case from that time to today.
Well, I would say too, if you looked at 5 MVPs, 7 DPOYs, 7 Finals MVPs, 11 rings, whatever the numbers are. I just don't think how just by resume alone, he's the greatest player of all time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, he's just smashing everybody else and everything.
Yeah, I think the case is there, especially how we value, especially because I think most people have Michael Jordan as the greatest of all time, and it's because of how he's able to dominate his era and collect the accolades. Bill Russell dominates the era more and collected, I wouldn't say more accolades, but probably close to equal accolades. And so
same amount of MVPs.
Same amount of MVPs, probably the same amount of All NBAs too, considering Jordan really played like 11 seasons, maybe even more All NBAs. So yeah,
and like I said, if they had all the awards around, he would collect more because he would have got more Finals MVPs and he would have got more DPOYs.
You know what's funny? Someone sent me this meme. It was like a LeBron Jordan debate. Someone sent me this like most trophies in NBA history, right? And Jordan was first. I think LeBron was second or third behind Russell. And I'm like, this entire graph is predicated. This entire graph only works for your argument because they didn't have Finals MVPs or DPOYs back then for Bill Russell. That's the only reason this graph works for you. Because if it did, then it wouldn't work. It'd look fucking ridiculous.
Hey, speaking on this, since we're all fans of the game and fans of the history of the game and all that, we respect the history. That's why we're all here. Why is it that you think people? How can I put this? Just the complete like the lack of respect of it with it. Like how can I put Jordan respects these guys, these players, old players. Like when I had Bob Pettit on, he said everybody's always been real respectful to players and all that. And now it's these new people like trying to be analysts and all that. I don't get where this is because when I was growing up, I was always really respectful of the game. I just don't understand it. Jules, maybe this is your area, because you grew up with kids your age, and I don't get it.
I would love to dissect this. So two things. So I don't think that that's necessarily true. I do think that there is. And this is something that I'm actually trying to currently work on because I found definitive evidence of players and reporters back in like right before the turn of the century, from like around 98 to like 2001, that a lot of the people are definitively like critiquing the game of what is happening. They're shooting too many threes. The salary cap's all messed up. David Stern clown and all this kind of stuff. And it's ironic because now we fast forward now, it's the same kind of stuff that's being said today of too many threes being shot. The salary cap's all screwed up because of the second apron and all this kind of stuff. And the evaluation of the players of past generations to current generations is very, very like well known. Wilt Chamberlain is definitely shitting on Shaq and Kareem. Kareem is doing that to Shaq and David Robinson. This isn't new, but I think it's very peculiar because of who is it being done to? You mentioned Bob Pettit, and I don't want to make it into a race thing, but I don't see any white players talking about prior white players in negative light. I only see African Americans do it, and again, I do not want to make this into a race thing, but that's something I've noted of what I found in my research. It's
well, JJ Redick is one of them.
Sure, okay, that's fair. No, JJ Redick, you're absolutely right. So I won't say.
You know what? That was really disappointing because JJ Redick was one of the best, probably the best basketball analyst at ESPN. To that point, there's a couple of things. The thing is JJ Redick said that in response to that guy Mad Dog at ESPN, who always, every time you bring up a current player, and I think this is the problem, Jules said it, is that he's got to bring up someone from the past. Say, no, he's not better than this guy, right? Like, so Bob Cousy, so if Chris Paul wins, it was 2021, I think maybe. Chris Paul wins, he could be a top 3 point guard of all time. And then he goes, not better than Bob Cousy, right? He always does shit like that. Or Giannis wasn't better than Maurice Lucas or something like that. He says stupid shit like that.
And that's clearly better than Maurice Lucas.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we have, and I think one of the biggest offenders, I think the greatest villain of basketball commentary in today's NBA, or the two of them, is Charles Barkley and Stephen A. Smith. Charles Barkley, because he's deeply embittered by the fact that he never won a championship and these guys are getting paid more than him. And Stephen A. Smith, because he's clearly on the take to protect Michael Jordan's legacy, to the point where he's reading text messages from Michael Jordan aloud on the air verbatim, or he's at the Super Bowl with him. And I think there's I think that's part of it. And I think another part of it is basketball. I think more than football, I think more than baseball, is a game that has a heavy emphasis on aesthetics. Why do people love Kobe Bryant? Why do people love Kyrie Irving especially? Why do people overrate Kyrie Irving? Because the way he plays basketball is so fun to watch. And I think that's different from, let's say, comparing Justin Jefferson to, I don't know, Lynn Swann, right? Something like that. Because the way people play basketball has changed, I think, a lot. And the aesthetics of the game are different. So when you grow up with
post route, still a post route.
Yeah, but a post route's still a post route. The footwork hasn't changed. Maybe it's obviously been a lot more run and gun, a lot more airing it out, and that's mostly because of the rule changes. But some of that stuff, it's not like the way people are able to handle the ball, the way people are able to attack the rim, and some of the fancy moves and all that other stuff. It's a game that really, I think, relies a lot on aesthetics as the driving force behind people's interest more than anything else. And so for people that grow up watching a guy like Kyrie Irving, right, who is a horribly overrated player who never, ever did shit as a number one option on his team, who's from 2018 to 2023 was the biggest fucking head case and nightmare in the NBA, right? A terribly unreliable player. Why he's being compared to Bob Cousy, right? Because why? Because people love watching Kyrie Irving play. I love watching Kyrie Irving play because it's a lot of fun. And the aesthetics today are more pleasing to a lot of people than the aesthetics back then. Maybe not for us, and maybe not for some people, maybe not for people that grew up watching that. My great uncle to the day he died swore to me that Wilt Chamberlain was the greatest player of all time. But to people today, they can't watch it back. They can't watch the old games back then and appreciate that for what it is and look at the context. They just want to see like pretty jumpers and up and unders and they want to see like bag work.
Well, that ends the show on that. We're out of time. Anybody else got any sentiments they want to end it with?
No.
Nope. Well, you heard Hoops. Fuck them. And that's how we're ending it this week. So we're out. We'll see y'all next.
Oh, Canada.
Put on a suit, drink water, don't drink and drive. Hey, man, call your mother.
It means nothing. It means nothing.
Nah, they lying to you. It's about the money.
Now you're more fluent.